Some nights change everything, some dresses become legendary. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Catherine Martinez never imagined that one evening would transform her from a struggling art curator into the most talked-about woman in New York's elite circles. When she slipped into that stunning low-cut pink silk dress and clasped her grandmother's mysterious ruby necklace around her throat, she thought she was simply attending another charity gala. She had no idea she was about to become the center of a story that would captivate millions, uncover family secrets spanning generations, and challenge everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and the price of beauty. What started as an innocent attempt to make a good impression would soon spiral into a whirlwind of romance, scandal, and danger that would leave everyone asking the same question. Who really was Catherine Martinez, and why did that ruby necklace hold the power to change so many lives? This is the true story of one woman's extraordinary journey from the shadows into the spotlight, where every glance carried weight, every whisper held secrets, and every choice could either elevate her to unimaginable heights or destroy everything she held dear. Catherine Martinez stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the delicate straps of the pink silk dress for the third time. The garment seemed to shimmer in the soft lamplight, its fabric flowing like liquid rose petals against her olive skin. She had spent nearly 3 months' salary on this dress, a decision that still made her stomach flutter with anxiety. But tonight was different. Tonight could change everything. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual charity gala was the kind of event that shaped careers in the art world. As a junior curator at the small but prestigious Whitmore Gallery, Catherine knew she needed to make connections, needed to be seen by the right people. The gallery was struggling, and her position hung by a thread, thinner than the silk now draped across her shoulders. She reached for the jewelry box on her dresser, a worn wooden case that had belonged to her grandmother, Isabella. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay the ruby necklace that had been passed down through 3 generations of Martinez women. Catherine had never worn it before tonight. The piece seemed too grand, too mysterious for her simple life, but something about this evening called for extraordinary measures. The necklace was breathtaking. 7 perfectly cut rubies, each the size of a grape, were set in intricate gold filigree that spoke of old-world craftsmanship. The center stone was the largest, a deep crimson that seemed to hold fire within its depths. As Catherine fastened the clasp behind her neck, she felt a strange warmth spread across her chest, as if the jewels were awakening after a long sleep. Her grandmother had rarely spoken about the necklace's history, offering only cryptic hints about better days and old friends in high places. Isabella had emigrated from Spain in the 1940s, carrying little more than this necklace and a heart full of secrets. She had worked as a seamstress in Manhattan's garment district, never speaking of the life she had left behind. Now, as Catherine gazed at her reflection, she wondered what stories the rubies could tell. The taxi ride to the Metropolitan Museum felt like a journey to another world. Catherine pressed her face to the window, watching the glittering skyline pass by. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Maria. "You're going to be absolutely stunning. Don't let those snobby people intimidate you. You belong there." But as the taxi pulled up to the museum's grand entrance, Catherine wasn't so sure. The red carpet stretched before her like a river of possibility and terror. Photographers lined the walkway, their cameras flashing like lightning as New York's elite emerged from their limousines and luxury cars. She recognized faces from magazines and society pages, oil heiresses, tech moguls, celebrities, and the kind of old money aristocrats who treated charity galas like personal playgrounds. Catherine paid the driver with hands that trembled slightly. She stepped onto the sidewalk, immediately feeling underdressed despite her expensive gown. Around her, women wore designer creations that cost more than her annual rent, their jewelry sparkling under the museum's spotlights. For a moment, she considered retreating, calling another taxi, and returning to her small apartment where she belonged. Then, something remarkable happened. As she climbed the museum's iconic steps, she noticed heads turning in her direction, not with the dismissive glances she had expected, but with genuine interest and admiration. A society photographer, positioned near the entrance to capture the evening's most noteworthy arrivals, raised his camera and began shooting. The flash illuminated Catherine's face and, more importantly, the extraordinary necklace at her throat.
"Excuse me," the photographer called out, lowering his camera with an expression of amazement.
"That necklace is absolutely stunning. I've been covering these events for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. Would you mind if I took a few more shots?" Catherine felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Of course," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. As the photographer continued shooting, Other guests began to take notice. A well-dressed older woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes approached, her gaze fixed on the ruby necklace. "My dear," the woman said in an accent that spoke of European refinement, "that is an extraordinary piece. Might I ask where you acquired it?" "It belonged to my grandmother," Catherine replied, instinctively touching the center stone. "It's been in our family for generations." The woman's expression shifted, becoming more intense. "Your grandmother, might I ask her name?" "Isabella Martinez. She came here from Spain in the 1940s. The woman's hand flew to her chest, and for a moment she seemed to struggle for breath. "Isabella," she whispered. "My God," I thought. We all thought those jewels were lost forever. Before Catherine could ask what she meant, the woman pressed an elegant business card into her hand. "I am Countess Elena Volkov. We must speak privately. There are things about that necklace, about your grandmother, that you need to know. Things that could change your life in ways you cannot imagine." The Countess disappeared into the crowd before Catherine could respond, leaving her standing on the museum steps with more questions than answers. The business card felt heavy in her palm, as if it carried the weight of family secrets long buried. Inside the museum, the gala was already in full swing. The Egyptian wing had been transformed into an elegant ballroom, with tables draped in ivory silk and centerpieces of white orchids that seemed to glow in the soft lighting. The museum's artifacts provided a dramatic backdrop, ancient treasures witnessing modern excess. Catherine found her assigned table near the back of the room, a reminder of her modest status in this glittering hierarchy. Her table mates included a mix of young professionals and mid-level donors, all clearly trying to make the same kind of impression she was attempting. She settled into her seat, still reeling from her encounter with the mysterious Countess. Across the room, she could see the evening's most prominent guests holding court near the bar. Real estate magnate Robert Sterling commanded attention in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, surrounded by a circle of admirers hanging on his every word. Tech entrepreneur Sarah Chen laughed at something her companion whispered, her diamond earrings catching the light with every movement. These were the people who shaped the city's cultural landscape with their checkbooks and influence. The evening's program began with remarks from the museum's director, followed by a presentation about the institution's newest acquisitions. Catherine tried to focus on the speeches, but she found herself constantly touching the ruby necklace, feeling its unusual warmth against her skin. Every few minutes, she noticed someone across the room staring in her direction, their gaze inevitably drawn to the extraordinary jewelry. During the cocktail hour, she ventured to the bar for a glass of champagne. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile, brightened when she approached. "That's some serious jewelry you're wearing," he said as he poured her drink. "I've been watching people's reactions all night. You're definitely the most photographed person here, and that's saying something at an event like this." Catherine glanced around and realized he was right. Throughout the evening, she had been approached by photographers, society writers, and curious guests, all drawn to her grandmother's necklace. What had started as an attempt to blend in had somehow made her the center of attention. "I had no idea it would cause such a stir," she admitted. "It belonged to my grandmother. I've never worn it before tonight." "Well, you're certainly making an impression. That woman over there has been trying to get your attention for the past 10 minutes. He nodded toward a corner of the room where Catherine spotted a striking brunette in an emerald green gown, watching her intently. The woman approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. She was perhaps 40, with the kind of polished beauty that spoke of excellent breeding and unlimited resources. Her smile was warm but calculating. "I'm Victoria Ashworth," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've been admiring your necklace all evening. It's absolutely extraordinary. I don't suppose you'd consider selling it?" Catherine nearly choked on her champagne. "Selling it? Oh no, I couldn't possibly. It's a family heirloom." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Of course, I understand completely. But if you ever change your mind, I'd be prepared to make a very generous offer. I collect exceptional jewelry, and pieces like yours are incredibly rare." She handed Catherine another business card. "I'm quite serious about my interest." As Victoria walked away, Catherine studied the card. Ashworth Acquisitions specialized in rare and historically significant jewelry and artifacts. The company's address was on Fifth Avenue, in one of the most expensive commercial districts in the city. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and increasingly bold offers for her grandmother's necklace. A oil heiress from Texas mentioned casually that she would pay whatever it takes to add the piece to her collection. A Russian oligarch's wife suggested a trade involving several smaller but equally beautiful pieces from her own vault. Even the museum's jewelry curator approached Catherine privately, hinting that the institution would be very interested in discussing an acquisition. By the time the evening's auction began, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had come hoping to make a few professional connections and perhaps catch the eye of a potential employer. Instead, she found herself at the center of a jewelry-feeding frenzy that she didn't understand. The auction itself featured an impressive array of donated items: a week in a Tuscan villa, a private dinner with a celebrity chef, artwork from established galleries, and jewelry pieces that, while beautiful, paled in comparison to what Catherine wore around her neck. She watched the bidding with fascination, noting how casually these wealthy individuals spent amounts that would transform her modest existence. During the auction's final moments, she felt someone slide into the empty chair beside her. She turned to find a man in his 30s with dark hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested success in whatever field he pursued. His tuxedo was impeccably cut, but his smile held genuine warmth rather than the calculated charm she had encountered all evening. "I'm Alexander Novak," he said quietly, so as not to disturb the ongoing auction. "I've been watching you navigate this circus with remarkable grace. First time at one of these events?" Catherine nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you still seem genuinely surprised by people's reactions. Trust me, in this crowd, authentic surprise is refreshing." His eyes dropped briefly to her necklace before meeting her gaze again. "That's an incredible piece you're wearing. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Early 20th century Spanish work, if I'm not mistaken." His knowledge impressed her. Most of the evening's admirers had simply gushed about the necklace's beauty without demonstrating any real understanding of its artistry.
You know jewelry? I'm an art historian, specializing in European decorative arts.
"I work with several auction houses, authenticating pieces and researching their provenance." He paused as applause erupted around them, signaling the auction's end. "Would you be interested in learning more about your necklace's history? I have resources that might be helpful." Something about Alexander's offer felt different from the others she had received. While everyone else had seemed focused on acquiring her grandmother's jewelry, he appeared genuinely interested in its story. And after her strange encounter with Countess Volkov, Catherine found herself hungry for answers about the family heirloom she had taken for granted for so many years. "I'd like that very much," she said, accepting his business card. Unlike the others she had collected, this one felt like an invitation to discovery, rather than a prelude to sale. As the gala wound down and guests began making their way to the museum's exit, Catherine reflected on the evening's unexpected developments. She had entered as an anonymous junior curator hoping to advance her career. She was leaving as the most talked-about woman at New York's social event of the season, carrying business cards from countesses, collectors, and mysterious art historians, all drawn to a piece of family history she barely understood.
The taxi ride home gave her time to process everything that had happened.
The ruby necklace felt heavier around her neck now, weighted not just with gold and gems, but with the promise of secrets about to be revealed.
Her grandmother's past, which had always seemed like a closed book, was suddenly on the verge of being opened. As Catherine climbed the stairs to her modest apartment, she had no idea that her evening of unexpected attention was only the beginning. The necklace had awakened interests and desires that would soon pull her into a world of romance, danger, and family secrets that stretched across continents and generations. What she had thought was simply a beautiful family heirloom was actually the key to a story that would change not only her understanding of her grandmother's mysterious past, but also the entire trajectory of her own life. The pink dress would hang in her closet for weeks afterward. But Catherine would never forget the night it transformed her from invisible to unforgettable, setting in motion a chain of events that would test everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the price of belonging to a world she had only dreamed of entering. The morning after the gala brought an avalanche of attention that Catherine could never have anticipated. She woke to find her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications, messages, and calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her small apartment, usually a peaceful refuge from the chaos of city life, had become the center of a media storm she didn't understand. The first shock came when she opened her laptop and saw her own image staring back at her from the homepage of New York's Social Scene, one of the city's most influential lifestyle websites. The headline read, "Mystery Woman in Stunning Ruby Necklace Steals Show at Met Gala." The accompanying article featured several photographs of her from the previous evening, the ruby necklace gleaming like captured fire against her pink dress. Catherine read the article with growing amazement and alarm. The writer had managed to gather quotes from several gala attendees, all praising her elegance, and speculating about the origins of her extraordinary jewelry. Victoria Ashworth had apparently told a reporter that the necklace was one of the most remarkable pieces I've encountered in 20 years of collecting, while another guest described it as absolutely museum quality. But it was the final paragraph that made Catherine's blood run cold. Sources close to European nobility suggest that the necklace may have historical significance beyond its obvious beauty. Countess Elena Volkov, a respected authority on lost royal jewels, was reportedly seen in deep conversation with the mysterious wearer. When contacted for comment, the Countess would only say that some treasures thought lost forever have a way of resurfacing when the time is right. Catherine's phone rang, interrupting her reading. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and she answered with a sense of dread. "Catherine, what on earth is going on?" Her mother's voice carried a mixture of pride and concern. "Mrs. Patterson from next door called this morning saying she saw your picture on some website. You're wearing Mama's necklace." "I know, Mum. I wore it to a work event last night. I had no idea it would cause such a reaction. Your grandmother made me promise never to let anyone see that necklace in public. She said it was too dangerous, that there were people who would—" Her mother's voice trailed off, as if she had revealed more than she intended. "People who would what, Mum? What aren't you telling me about Grandma Isabella?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Catherine wondered if the call had been dropped. Finally, her mother spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things about your grandmother's past that she made me swear never to discuss." "But if people are starting to recognize that necklace, if they're asking questions—" She paused again. "Maybe it's time you learned the truth. Can you come home this weekend? There are some of your grandmother's papers that I've never shown you, documents that might explain why she was so frightened of the past catching up with her." Catherine agreed to drive to her childhood home in New Jersey that Saturday, but the mystery would have to wait. The present was demanding her immediate attention. Her phone continued to ring throughout the morning, and by noon she had received calls from 3 different jewelry appraisers, 2 museum curators, a documentary filmmaker interested in hidden family treasures, and a producer from a cable television show about valuable antiques. The most intriguing call came from Alexander Novak, the art historian she had met at the gala. His voice carried an excitement that made her pulse quicken. "Catherine, I've spent the morning researching your necklace, and what I've discovered is extraordinary. Would you be free for lunch today? There are some things you need to see, and I'd rather discuss them in person." They met at a quiet cafe near the Museum of Natural History, away from the trendy restaurants where they might encounter other people from the previous night's gala. Alexander arrived carrying a leather portfolio that he handled with the care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. "Before I show you what I've found," he said, settling into the booth across from her, "I need you to understand that this information might be overwhelming. Your grandmother's necklace isn't just a beautiful piece of jewelry. It's a piece of history that many people have been searching for since the end of World War II. Catherine felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Alexander opened his portfolio and withdrew several documents and photographs. The first was a grainy black and white image that appeared to have been taken at some kind of formal event in the 1930s. In the center of the photograph stood an elegant woman in an elaborate gown, and around her neck was a necklace that Catherine recognized immediately. This photograph was taken at a reception in Madrid in 1936, just before the Spanish Civil War began. "The woman wearing your necklace is the Duchess of Salamanca, one of the wealthiest and most influential women in Spain at that time." Alexander's finger traced the outline of the familiar rubies. Her name was Elena Vasquez de Salamanca, and she was known throughout Europe for her jewelry collection and her support of the arts. "But how did my grandmother get the necklace?" Alexander pulled out another document, this one more recent. According to records from the Spanish National Archives, the Duchess's entire jewelry collection disappeared in 1938 when she fled Spain ahead of Franco's forces. Most historians assume the collection was either destroyed or stolen during the chaos of the war. But this necklace, known as Las Lágrimas de Salamanca, the Tears of Salamanca, was considered the crown jewel of her collection. Catherine stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the Grand Duchess with her humble grandmother who had worked in a garment factory. "Are you saying my grandmother stole it?" "Not necessarily. During the Spanish Civil War, many wealthy families entrusted their most valuable possessions to trusted servants or friends, hoping to retrieve them after the conflict ended. But the war changed everything, and many of those treasures were never reunited with their original owners."
Alexander's expression grew gentle.
Your grandmother may have been helping to protect the necklace, never expecting that she would end up carrying it with her to America and keeping it for the rest of her life.
The implications of his words settled over Catherine like a heavy blanket.
Her grandmother had carried this secret across an ocean and through decades of silence, never revealing that she possessed one of the most significant pieces of Spanish noble jewelry ever created. But why hadn't she ever tried to return it? Why had she kept such an extraordinary secret? There's more, Alexander continued, producing another photograph. This one showed a younger version of Countess Elena Volkov, the woman who had approached Catherine at the gala. The Countess is the granddaughter of the Duchess of Salamanca. She's been searching for her grandmother's lost jewelry collection for most of her adult life. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to process everything Alexander was telling her. So when she saw me last night, she recognized a piece of jewelry she thought was gone forever. A piece that represents not just monetary value but her family's lost legacy. Alexander closed the portfolio gently. Catherine, that necklace you're wearing is worth far more than its gold and rubies. It's a direct link to one of Spain's most prominent noble families and one of the most tumultuous periods in European history. Over lunch, Alexander explained more about the necklace's probable journey from Spanish nobility to Catherine's grandmother. He theorized that Isabella had likely worked for the Duchess's household and had been entrusted with the jewelry when the family fled Spain. The chaos of war and the complete disruption of Spanish society would have made returning the pieces nearly impossible, especially for a young woman with limited resources trying to build a new life in America. What I find most remarkable, Alexander said as they finished their meal, is that your grandmother managed to preserve the necklace in perfect condition for all these years. The craftsmanship is exquisite, each ruby is flawless, and the gold work shows techniques that are rarely seen today. Catherine touched her throat instinctively, though she wasn't wearing the necklace to lunch. After the morning's media attention, she had locked it safely in her apartment, suddenly understanding why her grandmother had kept it hidden for so many decades. What happens now? She asked. Does the Countess have a legal claim to it? Alexander's expression grew thoughtful.
That's complicated.
After so many years, and given the circumstances under which the necklace left Spain, ownership becomes murky. There would be questions about whether it was given freely, whether it was payment for services, whether your grandmother had legitimate reasons to believe she was the rightful owner. He paused. But beyond the legal questions, there's also the moral dimension. What do you think your grandmother would have wanted you to do? The question haunted Catherine for the rest of the afternoon. She returned to her apartment to find that the media attention had intensified rather than diminished. A local news crew had somehow identified her building, and she had to slip in through the service entrance to avoid being accosted by reporters. Her landlord had left several increasingly frantic voicemails asking her to please handle whatever situation you've gotten yourself into before it affected the other tenants. That evening, she received an unexpected visitor. The building's doorman called to announce that Countess Elena Volkov was in the lobby, requesting a few minutes of her time. Catherine's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility won out. The Countess entered Catherine's modest apartment with the same regal bearing she had displayed at the gala, but her expression held sadness rather than the excitement Catherine might have expected. She was an older woman, perhaps 70, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon and eyes the color of winter sky. "Thank you for seeing me," the Countess said, settling gracefully onto Catherine's small sofa. "I know this situation must be overwhelming for you, finding yourself at the center of attention because of a family heirloom you knew nothing about. Mr. Novak explained to me about your grandmother, about the connection between my family and yours," Catherine said carefully. "I'm sorry for the pain your family experienced during the war. The Spanish Civil War took everything from us," the Countess replied quietly. "Our homes, our lands, our country. My grandmother died in exile in France, never seeing Spain again. But she never stopped talking about her jewelry, especially Las Lagrimas de Salamanca. She described it to me so many times that when I saw you wearing it last night, I recognized it immediately." Catherine poured tea for both of them, buying time to organize her thoughts. "My grandmother never told us where the necklace came from. We knew it was special, but we had no idea about its history." "Your grandmother was Isabel Merino before she married and became Isabella Martinez," the Countess said gently. "She worked in my grandmother's household as a lady's maid from 1935 until we fled Spain in 1938. Isabel was completely trustworthy, devoted to our family. When it became clear that we had to leave the country immediately, my grandmother gave several pieces of her most valuable jewelry to Isabel, believing that a servant would be safer carrying them across the border than we would be. The story began to make sense. Catherine could imagine her young grandmother, probably terrified and uncertain about the future, suddenly responsible for treasures beyond her comprehension. In the chaos of war and displacement, with no way to contact her employers and no knowledge of whether they had survived, Isabella had done the only thing she could. She had kept the jewelry safe. "We lost track of Isabel completely after the war," the Countess continued. "We didn't even know if she had survived, let alone whether she still had the jewelry. My grandmother spent the rest of her life wondering what had happened to her most precious possessions, and to the young woman she had trusted with them." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes as she imagined the tragedy of two women separated by war, each carrying her own burden of loss and mystery. Her grandmother had lived with the weight of possessing something that didn't belong to her, while the Countess's grandmother had mourned the loss of treasures that represented her family's heritage. "What would you like me to do?" Catherine asked softly. The Countess reached across the small coffee table and took Catherine's hands in hers. "I don't want to take anything from you that rightfully belongs to your family. Your grandmother kept that necklace safe for 80 years, through decades when she could have sold it and dramatically improved her life. That kind of integrity deserves to be honored. But it belongs to your family. It belongs to both our families now. Your grandmother's faithfulness made her part of its story, just as much as my grandmother's original ownership." The Countess smiled, her eyes brightening. "I have a proposal that I hope will honor both women's memories and solve our dilemma in a way that would make them both proud." The Countess explained her idea with growing enthusiasm. Rather than demanding the necklace's return or engaging in a legal battle that would honor neither woman's memory, she suggested a partnership that would celebrate both families' connections to the extraordinary jewelry. She proposed that Catherine and she work together to research and document the necklace's complete history, creating a traveling exhibition that would tell the story of how a Spanish duchess's treasure became a symbol of faithfulness and survival in the hands of an immigrant woman who preserved it through decades of silence. The exhibition would travel to museums in both Spain and America, the Countess explained. It would tell the story of two remarkable women separated by war, but connected by an extraordinary piece of jewelry. And the proceeds from the exhibition could fund a scholarship program for young women pursuing careers in art history and museum studies.
Catherine was struck by the elegance of the solution.
Instead of seeing the necklace as something to be fought over, the Countess envisioned it as a bridge between families and cultures, a symbol of how beauty and faithfulness could survive even the darkest periods of history. "There's one more thing," the Countess added with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I believe the jewelry should be worn and celebrated, not locked away in a vault. While the exhibition is being prepared, I think you should continue wearing the necklace. After all, it's been in your family longer than it was ever in mine, and after seeing how beautiful you looked wearing it last night, how perfectly it suited you, I can't imagine it anywhere else." As the Countess prepared to leave, she handed Catherine a leather-bound photo album filled with images of her grandmother and the original Spanish household. Catherine saw photographs of a young Isabella Moreno, serious and dignified in her household uniform, standing beside the Duchess of Salamanca at various social events. In several images, the future Countess's grandmother wore the ruby necklace, looking remarkably like Catherine had the previous evening. "Your grandmother was extraordinarily beautiful," the Countess observed, studying one of the photographs over Catherine's shoulder. "You have her eyes and the same elegant bearing. No wonder the necklace looks so perfect on you." After the Countess left, Catherine spent the evening studying the photographs and documents she had been given. The images brought her grandmother's mysterious past to life, revealing a young woman who had lived through extraordinary circumstances with grace and dignity. Isabella had been trusted with priceless treasures and had honored that trust for nearly a century, carrying secrets that she took to her grave. But as Catherine prepared for bed, she realized that the necklace had given her something even more valuable than historical significance or monetary worth. It had connected her to a legacy of strong women who had faced impossible choices and found ways to preserve beauty and hope in the midst of chaos. Her grandmother had kept the necklace safe through decades of silence, and now it was Catherine's turn to ensure that its story was told and its significance honored. The pink dress still hung in her closet, a reminder of the evening that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she navigated the media attention, the art world's sudden interest in her family's story, and the complex process of working with the Countess to create something meaningful from their shared history. But tonight, Catherine felt a deep sense of connection to the grandmother she had never fully understood, and to the extraordinary necklace that had finally found its voice after 8 decades of silence. The drive to her mother's house in New Jersey felt like a journey into her own past. Catherine had made this trip countless times over the years, but today the familiar route carried new weight. In her purse, carefully wrapped in soft cloth, lay the ruby necklace that had transformed her quiet life into something resembling a fairy tale. But fairy tales, she was learning, often came with complications that Disney movies never mentioned. Her mother, Linda Martinez, met her at the door with an expression that mixed pride, worry, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. The modest suburban home where Catherine had grown up suddenly seemed impossibly small compared to the grand world she had stumbled into, but it was also comforting, a reminder of who she was before ruby necklaces and countesses had complicated her existence. "I've been getting calls all week," her mother said as she ushered Catherine into the living room. "Reporters, people claiming to be historians, even someone who said they were making a documentary about lost treasures." I didn't know what to tell them. Catherine settled onto the familiar couch where she had spent countless hours as a child, doing homework and watching television with her grandmother. Isabella had lived with them for the last 15 years of her life, but even in such close proximity, she had remained mysteriously silent about her life before America. "Mom, I need to know everything you can tell me about Grandma's past. The necklace I wore to the gala isn't just valuable, it belonged to Spanish nobility, and there's a woman who's been searching for it her entire life." Linda disappeared into the basement and returned with a large cardboard box that had been sealed with tape yellowed by decades. "After your grandmother died, I packed away all her personal papers. She made me promise to keep them safe, but never to look through them unless—" She paused, scissors poised over the tape. "Unless the past came looking for us." The first item in the box was a Spanish passport issued to Isabel Moreno in 1937. The photograph showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Catherine, with the same dark eyes and determined expression. But it was the official stamps and visas that told the real story. A desperate journey from Madrid to France, then from France to New York, all completed in a matter of months in 1938. Beneath the passport lay a collection of letters written in Spanish, their edges brown with age. Catherine's limited knowledge of the language wasn't sufficient to translate them, but she recognized several recurring names, including Duquesa de Salamanca, and what appeared to be references to jewelry and safekeeping.
Your grandmother could read and write in Spanish, her mother explained, but she refused to teach me.
She said the language belonged to a life she had left behind forever. Linda pulled out a small leather journal with pages covered in Isabella's careful handwriting. She wrote in this journal almost every day for 60 years. "I always assumed it was just daily thoughts, but now I wonder if she was recording something more important." At the bottom of the box lay the most surprising discovery of all, a formal letter written on elegant stationery bearing an aristocratic coat of arms. The letter was in English, dated 1952, and addressed to "My dear Isabel."
Catherine read aloud. "I hope this letter finds you well and prosperous in your new country.
The years since our separation have been difficult, filled with loss and uncertainty about the fate of those we left behind. I write to you now, not to ask for anything, but to tell you that whatever circumstances led you to keep my grandmother's jewelry, I hold no resentment. You were loyal and trustworthy when our world was falling apart, and I pray that the treasures you preserved have brought security to your new life. If fate ever allows our paths to cross again, I hope we can meet as friends rather than strangers separated by war and circumstance." The letter was signed Eleanor Volkov, Countess of Salamanca, in exile. Catherine felt her breath catch. "Mom, this is from the woman I met at the gala. She wrote to Grandma over 70 years ago." "There's more," Linda said, reaching into the box one final time. She withdrew an envelope marked, "To be opened only by my granddaughter Catherine," in Isabella's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, Catherine opened the envelope and unfolded a letter written in English, dated just 1 month before her grandmother's death 5 years earlier. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then the past has finally caught up with our family, as I always knew it would. The necklace that has been hidden in my jewelry box for all these years carries with it a story of love, war, and impossible choices that I have never had the courage to tell you while I lived. I was very young when I went to work for the Duchess of Salamanca in Madrid. It was 1935, and I thought I was the luckiest girl in Spain to be chosen for such a prestigious position. The Duchess was kind to me, treating me more like a daughter than a servant, and her granddaughter Elena became like a sister. We were close in age, and despite the differences in our birth, we formed a friendship that I treasured. When the war came, everything changed overnight. The family had to flee Spain with only what they could carry, but the Duchess's jewelry collection was too valuable and recognizable to take safely across the border. She asked me to carry several of the most important pieces, including the ruby necklace, promising that she would send for them once the family was settled safely in France. But the war destroyed more than anyone had imagined. Communications were cut, families were scattered, and by the time I reached America, I had no way to contact the family I had served. I told myself that I would keep the jewelry safe until I could find a way to return it, but as the years passed, that became impossible. The Duchess died in exile, Elena's family lost everything, and I was just one immigrant woman trying to survive in a new country. I kept the jewelry, not out of greed, but out of fear and confusion. How could I explain to authorities that I possessed treasures worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime? How could I prove that I hadn't stolen them? And as more time passed, how could I return something that had become my family's only security in times of financial hardship? I never sold any of the pieces, Catherine. That would have been a betrayal of the trust placed in me. But I kept them, and in doing so, I became a thief, not by intention, but by circumstance. This burden has weighed on my heart for 80 years. The ruby necklace was always the most beautiful, the most significant piece. The Duchess called it Las Lágrimas de Salamanca and told me it had been in her family for over 200 years. She said it was meant to be worn by women of strength and dignity, women who understood the responsibility that comes with beauty and privilege. If you have discovered the truth about this necklace, then you must decide what to do with the knowledge and the responsibility. I cannot tell you from beyond the grave whether to return it or keep it. I can only tell you that whatever choice you make it with honor and with consideration for all the women whose lives have been touched by these rubies. The Duchess who trusted me with her most precious possessions, Elena who lost her family's legacy to war and circumstance, and you, my granddaughter, who must now carry this burden forward. What I can tell you is that you are strong enough to handle whatever consequences come from this revelation. You have the intelligence to understand the complexities of the situation and the heart to make a decision that honors everyone involved. Most importantly, you have the beauty and grace to wear that necklace as it was meant to be worn, as a symbol of survival, dignity, and the connections that bind women across generations and continents. I love you more than you will ever know, and I am sorry that my silence forced you to discover this truth on your own. Your devoted grandmother, Isabella Moreno Martinez.
Catherine read the letter twice before the full weight of her grandmother's words settled over her.
Isabella hadn't been a thief or a woman driven by greed. She had been a young person caught in circumstances beyond her control, making the best decisions she could with limited information and resources. The years of silence hadn't been about hiding guilt, but about protecting a family legacy that had become impossibly complicated.
She never told me any of this, Linda said softly, tears streaming down her face.
All these years, she carried this burden alone. But she found a way to tell me, Catherine replied, holding the letter carefully. She knew that someday I would need to know the truth. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the remaining papers in the box. There were photographs of Isabella's life in Spain, documents related to her immigration to America, and records showing that she had worked multiple jobs for decades, living simply and saving every penny she could. Despite having access to jewelry worth a fortune, she had chosen to live modestly, using the pieces only as security rather than as sources of wealth. Most revealing were the copies of letters Isabella had written but never sent, all addressed to Elena Volkov at various European addresses. In these drafts, Isabella had attempted again and again to explain what had happened to the Duchess's jewelry, to apologize for her inability to return it, and to express her hope that Elena had survived the war and rebuilt her life. The letters showed that hardly a year had passed without Isabella trying to find a way to reconnect with the family she had served. She never stopped thinking about them, Catherine realized. She never stopped feeling responsible for returning what wasn't hers. But it was the final document in the box that provided the most surprising revelation. Hidden beneath everything else was a bank statement from 1962 showing that Isabella had established a substantial savings account with instructions that it should be held in trust for the legal heirs of the Duchess of Salamanca, should they ever be located. Over the decades, the account had grown significantly through compound interest, representing nearly every spare dollar Isabella had earned during her years as a seamstress and factory worker. "Mom, did you know about this account?" Linda shook her head, staring at the statement in amazement. "I had no idea. She never mentioned any special savings, never talked about money beyond what we needed for daily expenses." Catherine understood immediately what her grandmother had been trying to do. Unable to return the jewelry itself, Isabella had created an alternative form of restitution, setting aside money that could be given to Elena's family if they were ever found. It was a solution that demonstrated both her integrity and her practical understanding of the complicated situation she faced. That evening, Catherine called Alexander Novak to share what she had discovered. His excitement was palpable as she described the contents of her grandmother's box, particularly the unsent letters and the trust account. "Catherine, this changes everything," he said. "These documents prove definitively that your grandmother never intended to keep the jewelry permanently. She was trying to act as a trustee, preserving the pieces until she could return them to their rightful owners." "What does that mean legally?" "It means that your family's claim to the necklace is much stronger than anyone would have assumed. Your grandmother was operating in good faith, trying to fulfill a responsibility that war and circumstance made impossible to complete. No court would consider her actions theft under these circumstances." But Catherine found herself less concerned about legal technicalities than about moral obligations. Her grandmother had lived with the weight of this secret for 80 years, and now it was her responsibility to find a way to honor everyone involved. Isabella, who had preserved the jewelry through decades of silence, Elena, who had lost her family's heritage to war, and the ruby necklace itself, which deserved to have its story told truthfully and completely. She also couldn't ignore the transformation that wearing the necklace had brought to her own life. In the week since the gala, she had received 3 job offers from prestigious galleries, an invitation to write an article about family heirlooms for a major art magazine, and enough media attention to establish her as a genuine expert on European decorative arts. The necklace hadn't just revealed family secrets, it had opened doors to opportunities she had never imagined. The next morning, Catherine met with Countess Elena Volkov at the Countess's elegant Manhattan apartment. The space was a testament to a lifetime of collecting beautiful objects, filled with antiques, artwork, and photographs that told the story of European nobility adapting to modern American life. "I've learned so much about my grandmother since our last conversation," Catherine said, sharing copies of Isabella's letters and documents with the Countess. "I understand now why she kept the necklace, and why she was never able to return it." The Countess read through the materials with tears in her eyes, stopping frequently to study photographs of her own grandmother and the young Isabella Marino. "I remember Isabel so clearly," she said finally. "She was devoted to our family, completely trustworthy. My grandmother often said that Isabel understood the value of beautiful things better than many people born to wealth." "There's something else," Catherine continued, showing her the bank statements from the trust account Isabella had established. "My grandmother saved money for decades, hoping to provide some form of restitution if your family was ever found." The Countess stared at the documents for a long moment before looking up with an expression of wonder. "Do you understand what this means, Catherine? Your grandmother turned herself into the guardian of our family's legacy. She preserved not just the jewelry, but the memory of what it represented. She became part of our family's story in a way that no legal document could have established." Together, they began planning the exhibition that would tell the complete story of the ruby necklace and the remarkable women whose lives it had connected. The Countess had already contacted several major museums in both Spain and America, all expressing enthusiastic interest in hosting a show about lost treasures and found families. "I have one request," the Countess said as they concluded their meeting. "I want you to wear the necklace to all the exhibition openings. It belongs with you now, Catherine. Your grandmother's years of faithful guardianship have made you its rightful owner, and I can't imagine it looking more beautiful on anyone else." As Catherine walked through Central Park on her way home, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the night she decided to wear her grandmother's necklace to the gala. What had started as a simple attempt to make a good impression had revealed family secrets, connected her to European nobility, and launched her career in directions she had never anticipated. But more importantly, it had shown her the power of women supporting each other across generations and circumstances. Her grandmother had risked everything to preserve a trust placed in her by another woman. The Countess had chosen collaboration over conflict when she could have demanded the return of her family's property. And Catherine was learning to navigate a world where beauty, integrity, and intelligence could open doors that had seemed forever closed. The pink dress still hung in her closet, waiting for the next special occasion. But Catherine knew now that she carried something even more valuable than designer clothing or precious jewelry. She carried the legacy of women who had faced impossible choices with grace, who had preserved beauty in the midst of chaos, and who had found ways to honor their responsibilities even when the path forward was unclear. The ruby necklace would soon become the centerpiece of museum exhibitions that would tell its story to thousands of visitors. But for Catherine, its greatest value lay in the connections it had revealed, to her grandmother's hidden past, to a family of European nobility, and to her own capacity for handling responsibility and opportunity with the same dignity that had characterized the women who came before her. 3 months after the gala that changed her life, Catherine found herself standing in the grand entrance hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But this time she was there as an honored guest, rather than an anxious observer. The museum was hosting the opening reception for Las Lágrimas de Salamanca, A Journey Through Time, the exhibition that told the story of her grandmother's necklace and the remarkable women whose lives it had touched. The transformation in Catherine's circumstances had been nothing short of extraordinary. The media attention following the gala had led to a prestigious position as Senior Curator of European Decorative Arts at the Whitmore Gallery, a role that came with both increased responsibility and a salary that allowed her to move from her cramped studio apartment to a spacious one-bedroom in the Upper West Side. More importantly, the work gave her opportunities to research and acquire pieces that would have been impossible to access just months earlier. But tonight wasn't about her career success. Tonight was about honoring the legacy of Isabella Moreno Martinez and the Duchess of Salamanca, two women separated by class and circumstance but united by their appreciation for beauty and their capacity for trust in impossible situations. Catherine wore a new dress for the occasion, a deep sapphire blue silk that complemented the rubies perfectly. The necklace itself had been professionally cleaned and restored, bringing out depths of color and sparkle that had been hidden beneath decades of careful but amateur maintenance. As she caught her reflection in the museum's polished surfaces, she marveled at how natural it felt now to wear something that had once seemed impossibly grand. "You look absolutely radiant," said Alexander Novak, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne, and the easy smile that had become wonderfully familiar over the past few months. Their working relationship on the exhibition research had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on shared intellectual curiosity and mutual respect that had surprised them both with its natural progression into romance. "I keep thinking about Grandma Isabella," Catherine replied, accepting the champagne. "How she would feel, knowing that her secret has become something that brings people together, rather than something she had to carry alone." Alexander's research had uncovered additional details about the necklace's history that made the exhibition even more compelling. The rubies themselves had been mined in Burma in the 1890s and set by master jewelers in Paris, before being purchased by the Duke of Salamanca as a wedding gift for his bride. The necklace had attended coronations, state dinners, and diplomatic receptions across Europe before the Spanish Civil War forced its hasty departure from the continent. "The response to the exhibition has exceeded everyone's expectations," Alexander said, nodding toward the crowds gathering around the various display cases. "The museum is already talking about extending the run and possibly creating a traveling version." The centerpiece of the exhibition was a dramatic display that featured the necklace itself, illuminated by specially designed lighting that made each ruby seem to glow from within. Surrounding it were photographs, documents, and artifacts that told the story of its journey from Spanish nobility to American immigrant family and back into the public eye. Visitors could trace the necklace's path through history while learning about the broader context of European displacement during the 1930s and the experiences of immigrants who carried pieces of their former lives to America. But the exhibition was more than just a display of beautiful jewelry. It had become a meditation on themes of trust, loyalty, cultural preservation, and the ways that objects carry human stories across time and geography. The museum's education department had developed programming that explored questions about cultural ownership, the responsibilities that come with preserving historical artifacts, and the complex ethics of wartime survival. "Catherine, there's someone I'd like you to meet," said Countess Elena Volkov, approaching with an elegant woman who appeared to be in her 60s. "This is my cousin, Maria Elena Vasquez, who has traveled from Madrid specifically for tonight's opening." Maria Elena's resemblance to the photographs of the original Duchess of Salamanca was striking. She had the same aristocratic bearing and intelligent eyes that Catherine had seen in the historical images, but her expression held warmth rather than the formal restraint typical of 1930s society portraits.
I cannot adequately express what this exhibition means to our family,
Maria Elena said, her accented English carrying emotion that formal diplomacy couldn't quite mask. "For so many years we mourned not just the loss of our material possessions, but the loss of our family story. Your grandmother preserved more than jewelry, Catherine. Jewelry. She preserved our history." The reunion between the Spanish and American branches of the necklace's family had produced practical results beyond the emotional satisfaction of recovered history. Maria Elena had brought documents from Spanish archives that filled in gaps in the necklace's early history, while Catherine's discovery of Isabella's papers had provided the missing pieces of its mid-20th century journey. Together, they had created a complete narrative that would be preserved in museum archives for future researchers. More significantly, the collaboration had led to the establishment of the Isabella Moreno Foundation, funded by the savings account Catherine's grandmother had established decades earlier. The foundation provided scholarships for young women pursuing careers in art history and museum studies, with preference given to applicants whose families had experienced displacement or immigration. It was a fitting legacy for a woman who had spent her life preserving beauty while dreaming of opportunities for future generations. "Your grandmother would be so proud of what you've accomplished," said Catherine's mother, Linda, who had traveled from New Jersey for the opening reception. She wore a simple black dress and a pearl necklace, but her face glowed with pride as she watched her daughter navigate the sophisticated crowd with confidence and grace. Linda had struggled initially with the public attention surrounding the necklace's revelation. As someone who valued privacy and had spent years honoring her mother's request for silence about the past, she found the media scrutiny uncomfortable. But seeing how Catherine had used the attention to create something meaningful and educational had helped her understand that some secrets were meant to be shared rather than preserved. "She always said you had the intelligence and character to handle anything life put in front of you," Linda continued. "I think she knew that someday you would be the one to tell her story properly." As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself moving through the exhibition with a sense of wonder at how many lives had been touched by her grandmother's story. Art historians discussed the necklace's place in the broader context of European decorative arts. Social historians explored its significance as an example of cultural preservation during periods of displacement. Jewelry experts marveled at the craftsmanship and the remarkable condition that Isabella's careful stewardship had maintained. But it was the young women who approached her throughout the evening that moved Catherine most deeply. Several college students studying art history expressed how inspiring they found Isabella's story of determination and integrity. A young Spanish woman, granddaughter of Civil War refugees, tearfully thanked Catherine for helping her understand her own family's experiences of loss and adaptation. A jewelry design student sketched the necklace while explaining her dream of creating pieces that would carry stories across generations. "You've created something really special here," said Victoria Ashworth, the collector who had approached Catherine at the original gala with an offer to purchase the necklace. "I've attended countless exhibition openings, but I've never seen people respond to a single piece with this kind of emotional engagement." Victoria's presence at the opening represented a graceful acknowledgement that some treasures were more valuable when shared publicly than when held in private collections. Her initial interest in acquiring the necklace had evolved into genuine support for the exhibition and the foundation it had inspired. "The necklace belongs here, in this context," Catherine replied, watching visitors study the display cases with fascination. "Grandma Isabella preserved it for 80 years, but she preserved it for everyone, not just for our family." The evening's program included remarks from the museum's director, who spoke about the importance of preserving immigrant stories and recognizing the contributions of working-class women to cultural preservation. Countess Elena offered reflections on the resilience of families separated by war and the importance of forgiveness in healing historical wounds. Catherine herself spoke briefly about her grandmother's legacy and the ongoing work of the foundation established in her memory. But the most moving moment came when a small group of children from the museum's education program presented a performance they had created based on Isabella's story. Using simple costumes and props, they reenacted key moments from the necklace's journey. From its creation in Spanish noble circles, through its preservation in American immigrant communities, to its eventual recognition as a significant historical artifact. Watching the children perform, Catherine was struck by how Isabella's private struggles had become a public story of hope and determination. Her grandmother had carried the weight of impossible choices for decades, but those choices had ultimately created opportunities for education, cultural exchange, and international cooperation that extended far beyond anything Isabella could have imagined. "She's watching this, you know," Alexander whispered, standing beside Catherine as the children took their bows to enthusiastic applause. "Somewhere, your grandmother is seeing that her faithfulness has created something beautiful for the next generation." As the formal reception wound down, Catherine found herself standing alone before the necklace's display case, studying the rubies that had transformed her understanding of family, responsibility, and possibility. The jewelry looked simultaneously ancient and timeless, carrying the weight of history, while somehow remaining vibrantly alive and relevant. "It's funny," she murmured to herself. "I thought the necklace would change my life because of its beauty or its value. I never imagined it would change my life because of the story it carried." The story, she realized, was still being written. The exhibition would travel to museums in Spain, France, and other American cities, reaching new audiences and inspiring new scholarship. The foundation would support young women for decades to come, creating opportunities that would honor Isabella's memory while serving practical needs in the present. And Catherine herself would continue to wear the necklace at special events, not as a symbol of personal wealth, but as a reminder of the connections that bind women across time and circumstance. "Ready to go?" Alexander asked, offering his arm as the museum staff began preparing to close the galleries. Catherine took one last look at the exhibition that had grown from her grandmother's secret into a celebration of women's resilience and cultural preservation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as she balanced her curatorial responsibilities with the ongoing work of managing the foundation and supporting the traveling exhibition. But tonight had proved that some legacies were worth the complexity they created. "I'm ready," she said, linking her arm through Alexander's and walking toward the museum's exit. The ruby necklace remained secure around her throat, no longer a burden of family secrets, but a symbol of stories well told and responsibilities well handled. Outside, the city stretched before them, full of possibilities that Catherine was only beginning to understand. The pink dress that had started it all hung safely in her closet, waiting for the next special occasion. But Catherine knew now that the most important transformations came not from what she wore, but from the courage to embrace the stories that shaped her family's past and her own future. The necklace caught the streetlight as they walked, its rubies glowing like small flames in the New York night. Isabella's legacy lived on, not in silence and secrecy, but in celebration and sharing, exactly as it was meant to be. 2 years after the exhibition that launched her into international prominence, Catherine stood on the terrace of a restored palace overlooking the Spanish countryside, preparing for what would be the most significant event of her life. The venue was the Palacio de Salamanca, the ancestral home of the Duchess whose necklace had changed everything. Through the generous support of the Spanish Cultural Ministry and private donors inspired by Isabella's story, the palace had been restored as a museum dedicated to the preservation of artifacts displaced by war and political upheaval. Today, Catherine would marry Alexander Novak in a ceremony that brought together families, cultures, and continents in ways that seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. More importantly, she would wear her grandmother's ruby necklace as a bride, finally fulfilling Isabella's dream of seeing the jewelry celebrated in joy rather than carried in secrecy. The wedding had evolved from a simple civil ceremony into an international celebration of art, history, and human connection. Guests had traveled from across Europe and America, including museum directors, art historians, members of Spanish nobility, and representatives from the dozens of young women who had received scholarships from the Isabella Moreno Foundation. The ceremony would be conducted in both Spanish and English, honoring the linguistic heritage of both families while symbolizing the bridges that art and love could build across cultural boundaries.
"You look exactly like your grandmother did on her wedding day," said Linda Martinez, adjusting the delicate veil that had been recreated based on photographs found in Isabella's papers.
"She would be so proud to see you wearing her necklace for such a happy occasion." Catherine turned to study her reflection in the antique mirror that had once belonged to the original Duchess of Salamanca. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of simplicity and elegance. Designed by a Spanish couturier who had donated her services to honor Isabella's memory, the ivory silk complemented the rubies perfectly, creating an ensemble that felt both traditional and thoroughly modern. But it was the necklace itself that commanded attention. Professional restoration had revealed details of craftsmanship that had been hidden for decades, and the rubies now displayed a depth of color and fire that took everyone's breath away. Each stone seemed to capture and reflect the Spanish sunlight streaming through the palace windows, creating an effect that was nothing short of magical. "I keep thinking about all the brides who have worn these rubies," Catherine mused, touching the center stone gently. The original Duchess, probably other women in her family, and now me. It's amazing to think that something so beautiful has witnessed so many important moments across so many generations. The morning had brought unexpected gifts that deepened the emotional significance of the day. Maria Elena Vasquez, the Spanish cousin who had become like a second mother to Catherine, had presented her with a leather-bound album containing photographs and documents that traced the necklace's complete history from its creation to the present day. The album would become a family heirloom, ensuring that future generations would understand the full story of the extraordinary jewelry. Even more surprising was the arrival of Sofia Morales, an elderly woman from Madrid who had traveled specifically to attend the wedding. Sofia had known Isabella during their youth in Spain and had never forgotten her friend who had disappeared during the chaos of the Civil War. Through publicity surrounding the exhibition and foundation, Sofia had learned of Isabella's fate and had come to honor her memory and meet her granddaughter. "Isabel was the most honest person I ever knew," Sofia had told Catherine during their emotional meeting the previous evening. Even as children, she had this sense of responsibility, this need to do what was right even when it was difficult. When I heard that she had preserved the Duchess's jewelry for 80 years, I wasn't surprised at all. That was exactly the kind of person she was. Sophia's presence provided a living link to Isabella's youth and personality that no amount of documentation could have supplied. Through her stories, Catherine learned about her grandmother's dreams of seeing the world, her talent for needlework that had brought her to the Duchess's attention, and her deep loyalty to the people she cared about. These details added new layers to Catherine's understanding of the woman who had shaped her family's destiny through her choices during wartime. "It's time," announced Alexander's sister, who was serving as wedding coordinator. "The guests are assembled, the musicians are ready, and your groom is looking appropriately nervous for someone who's about to marry the most famous jewelry curator in the Western world." Catherine laughed, remembering how Alexander had proposed 6 months earlier during a quiet dinner at the small cafe where they had first discussed the necklace's history. He had confessed that he had fallen in love not just with her beauty and intelligence, but with her capacity for handling extraordinary circumstances with grace and humor. The proposal itself had been refreshingly normal, no dramatic gestures or public displays, just two people who had discovered that their professional collaboration had evolved into something deeper and more lasting. The ceremony took place in the palace's restored chapel, an intimate space that had witnessed centuries of family celebrations and sorrows. Countess Elena Volkov, who had become Catherine's close friend and mentor, served as matron of honor, while Alexander's brother acted as best man. The guest list read like a directory of the international art world, but the atmosphere was warm and personal, rather than formal and intimidating. As Catherine walked down the aisle, she was struck by how different this felt from her entrance at the gala that had started everything. That night, she had been nervous and uncertain, hoping to make a good impression in a world where she felt like an outsider. Today, she moved with confidence through a community that had embraced her family's story and supported her efforts to honor her grandmother's legacy. The ceremony itself blended traditions from both families' backgrounds. Catherine and Alexander exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's work while building a life that honored the values of integrity, cultural preservation, and service to others that had brought them together. The Spanish portion of the service included readings from poetry about the endurance of love and beauty through difficult times, while the American elements emphasized the couple's commitment to creating something new while respecting the traditions that had shaped them. "I promise to love you not just for who you are today," Catherine said during her vows, "but for the way you've helped me understand who I was meant to become. You've shown me that the most beautiful discoveries come from understanding the stories that connect us to each other and to the past." Alexander's response brought tears to many guests' eyes. "I promise to support your dreams and to help you continue the work your grandmother began. Isabella preserved beauty and truth through the darkest of times, and I want to spend my life helping you carry that legacy forward in ways that bring light to others." The exchange of rings featured bands that incorporated small rubies from jewelry pieces that various family members had contributed, creating new symbols of commitment that connected the couple to their shared dedication to preserving artistic heritage. It was a gesture that would have made Isabella proud, demonstrating how family treasures could be transformed to serve new purposes while maintaining their essential meaning. Following the ceremony, guests moved to the palace's restored ballroom for a reception that celebrated not just the marriage, but the broader community that had formed around Isabella's story. The evening featured music from both Spanish and American traditions, food that honored both cultures' culinary heritage, and dancing that brought together generations of people who might never have met without the connections created by the ruby necklace. "This is exactly what your grandmother would have wanted," Countess Elena told Catherine, as they watched guests from a dozen different countries sharing stories and laughter around elegantly set tables. She preserved that necklace not just as an object, but as a symbol of the connections that make us human. Tonight proves that her sacrifice created something lasting and beautiful. The evening's program included the presentation of the year's Isabella Moreno Foundation scholarships to 12 young women pursuing advanced degrees in art history, museum studies, and cultural preservation. Each recipient spoke briefly about her research interests and career goals, demonstrating how Isabella's legacy was inspiring new generations of scholars and curators. The diversity of the recipients, representing 6 different countries and multiple academic disciplines, illustrated how broadly the Foundation's impact was spreading. But the most memorable moment came when Sofia Morales, Isabella's childhood friend, offered a toast that brought the entire reception to its feet. To Isabel, who taught us that love and loyalty can survive any separation, and to Catherine, who has shown us that the most beautiful inheritance is the courage to share our stories with the world. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself dancing with guests who represented every phase of her journey, from anonymous curator to international figure. She waltzed with museum directors who had supported the traveling exhibition, laughed with scholarship recipients who saw her as a role model, and shared quiet moments with family members who had watched her transform over the past 2 years. How does it feel to be married to the woman who made ruby necklaces fashionable again? Maria Elena asked Alexander during a break between dances. It feels like I married someone who understands that the most valuable things in life are the connections we make with other people. Alexander replied, watching Catherine pose for photographs with Spanish officials who had supported the palace's restoration. The necklace brought us together, but it's Catherine's heart that made me want to stay. Later, as the reception moved toward its conclusion, Catherine stepped outside onto the palace terrace to appreciate the Spanish countryside under a canopy of stars. The ruby necklace caught the moonlight, creating the same magical effect she had noticed 2 years earlier when she first wore it to the Metropolitan Museum gala.
But now the jewelry felt like an extension of herself rather than an exotic costume. A symbol of responsibilities embraced rather than burdens inherited.
Thinking about your grandmother? Alexander asked, joining her at the stone balustrade overlooking the valley.
Thinking about how many impossible things have turned out to be possible, Catherine replied. 2 years ago, I was struggling to pay rent and wondering if I'd ever have a real career in the art world. Tonight, I'm married to my best friend in a Spanish palace, surrounded by people who have become family, wearing a necklace that has connected us all to a story bigger than anything I could have imagined. What do you think happens next? Catherine considered the question while studying the necklace's reflection in the terrace's polished stone. The traveling exhibition was scheduled to visit museums in 6 more countries over the next 3 years. The foundation had received additional funding that would allow it to support twice as many scholarships annually. And there had been discussions about creating a documentary film that would bring Isabella's story to even broader audiences. I think we keep telling this story, she said finally. The necklace has taught me that the most beautiful things survive not because they're hidden away and protected, but because they're shared and celebrated and allowed to inspire new connections between people. Speaking of sharing, Alexander said with a smile that suggested he had been planning this moment, I have something for you. He withdrew a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket, presenting it with the kind of ceremony that their original jewelry discovery deserved. Inside, Catherine found a delicate pair of ruby earrings that perfectly complemented her grandmother's necklace. But more importantly, she found a note explaining that the earrings had been created using small gems that had broken away from the necklace over the decades. Gems that Alexander had carefully collected during the restoration process and had set by the same Spanish craftsman who had created the original pieces. Now you can wear part of Isabella's story even when the necklace is in museums, he explained, and someday you can pass both pieces to our daughter, along with the complete story of how they brought our families together. As Catherine fastened the earrings and felt their familiar warmth against her skin, she realized that Alexander had given her something even more valuable than beautiful jewelry. He had given her a way to ensure that Isabella's legacy would continue to evolve and grow, creating new stories while honoring the original sacrifice that had made everything possible. The newlyweds returned to the reception for the final dances of the evening, moving together to music that blended Spanish and American melodies in arrangements that honored both traditions. Around them, guests from multiple generations and continents celebrated not just a wedding but the power of art and love to create connections that transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. As midnight approached and the party began winding down, Catherine took one last look at the palace that had served as the setting for the most important day of her life. Tomorrow, she and Alexander would begin their honeymoon with visits to museums in Paris and London that were preparing to host the traveling exhibition. Next month, they would return to New York to begin their married life while continuing their work with the foundation and the ongoing research into pasta.